My name is Doug Wood, and I am portraying Mankiller Ostenaco, most known today by historians as Ostenaco. He is a Cherokee colonel, actually, in their ranking system, and he is leading a gang of warriors against the French, and they're operating in the Potomac region, and they're heading towards Fort Duquesne to try to take the war from the backyards of their allies, the Virginians, to the backyards of their enemies, the French. Chaligi brethren call me Mankiller Ostenaco. My English brethren call me often Ostenaco. Please read on.
Is granted safe passage through the realm of His grace, O God, defender of faith.
His most Britannic Majesty, yes, defender of the faith,
to range the backwoods of Virginia and Carolina.
Yes, he just told you I'm ranging the backwoods of Virginia and Carolina.
Along with the bearer's person of these items, several long arms.
This is a long arm.
Rifled guns.
And rifled guns amongst us.
Pennsylvania youth.
A Pennsylvania youth about your age, I would say. And it's blurry there, isn't it?
That's right.
He speaks High Dutch. Please read on.
Authorized by His Majesty, sole agent for the Northern Indian Department.
The Southern Indian Department. Oh, this is
Southern-
not William Johnson. No.
The Southern Indian Department, Right Honorable Edmund Acton, ECQ. And
Yes, that's an abbreviation for Esquire.
Squire and Assessor to hereby Captain
Raymond
Raymond
Desmarais.
Desmarais.
Captain Raymond Desmarais is the commandant at Fort Loudon. He is the one who attested to this and signed his name.
Delivered this 27th day of March, 1758.
God save the King. Let's say it together, all of us. 1, 2, 3. God save the King. You can do better than that, can't they?
Yes,
You
I
lead us.
can.
You say 1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3.
God save the King. Thank you. Hoorah, huzzah. Thank you, brother. I hope someday that my children will be able to read the English script. There's power in these written words. The rest of the warriors in my gang are encamped less than half a league from here. The Pennsylvania youth, we have returned to the authorities in that colony. We trust that they will find the remnants of his family and return him there too. I had hoped that I might take a deer or a turkey here abouts for our evening meal, but speaking with you, my English brothers and sisters, is a pleasure that I will not forgo. We shall eat tomorrow. When I was a boy, my mother taught me many important things I have not forgotten. Younger than the lad who just read, she taught me that I should always listen to Wah Yah, our clan leader. She told me Wah Yah, Wolf, will always guide me, even when our chosen leaders fail to do so. For two-legged people like yourselves and like myself, we may falter, become confused. But Wolf is my elder brother. Indeed, Wolf is my grandfather. He sits in the council of all the first beings. I have always listened to him whenever he has come to me to help me. For many years, your governors asked us to make peace with the Six Nations and other northern Indians, and this we have attended to with some success. But the French of late have lured away many Anisawanugi. The French have lured the Shawanoes away from our English king. So when your governor Dinwiddie asked us to consider taking up our hatchets against our traditional enemies, I was glad to speak on behalf of the call to arms in our councils. You see, brothers and sisters, when I first heard the words of Governor Dinwiddie, I had a strong dream. I had this dream several nights in a row. Have any of you ever had a dream that returned to you more than once? The same dream? You? Anyone else? Don't be afraid. Does not mean you need medical attention. These are your ancestors coming to speak to you and guide you in the right path. So Wolf came to me. He encouraged me to be brave and resolute in fighting the enemy. He warned me of the trickery of the French and their allies. He told me the war would not be easily won, but if we would stand fast with our English king, we would gain a decisive victory and we would be blessed for many years. At Ichauti, my nation's principal town, as well as at Kawahiyi, the head town of the Lord Salagi, councils were held for many days. I spoke on behalf of fighting the Ani Sawanubi. We have fought the Shawano since the time before I was born, and since the last war, their warriors had taken many captives, so the grief of our mothers and our grandmothers had not been fully comforted. Many days of council were necessary to give our principal women time to decide our nation's role in the war. The head women in most of the towns favored you English, but in some of the western towns, concerns over attacks by Western engines allied to the French caused those councils to remain undecided. I was glad to answer the call to arms. I fully understand the treachery of the French foxes. They intend only to conquer us and to pay us low prices for our deerskins. In the memory of my people, your English goods have always been of better quality. The prices our deerskins have brought have been better with you and your traders than with the French. And your English kings have given us many good presents. So when most of the councils decided for war, I proposed a bold stroke against the Shawano in the winter that followed the defeat of your English army at the French fort at the forks of Ohio River, Fort Duquesne. Our large force would move swiftly down Sandy Creek on foot and by canoe. We would attack the Shawano towns on Ohio and Sonoyota rivers. We knew their warriors were with the French in their forts at Fort Duquesne and in the Illinois country, as well as at the Alabama's fort, and we knew that would weaken the defenses at Sonoyota. We sent wampum belts to our middle towns and our lower towns, and I recruited 130 warriors, and we intended for the Shawano towns. Your governor, Dinwiddie, ordered Major Lewis to form a gang, an army, and join us on our campaign. And so, 2 winters ago, in 1756, we formed up together at Fort Frederick, not the one in the colony of Maryland, Fort Frederick on the Dunkert's bottom of New River, several nights' journey southward from here. Now, at Fort Frederick, we danced our war dance. We sang our war songs, and a few Virginians joined in to sing of their deeds of valor in the last war. That is the war in which I earned my rank, Askyat-Dehi. You heard me tell you earlier when the boy was reading my pass. Askyat-Dehi, man-killer. It is the second highest rank we warriors can attain. The first is Askyat-Gunsta. You English say great warrior. Augustota is one of the few men in my generation who has earned that rank. I do aspire to it, and with the help of Wolf and the great being above, I intend to gain that rank in this present war. You see, brothers and sisters, although I am healthy, I am no longer a young warrior. Over 50 winters have passed since my mother gave birth to me. My mother, she is my inspiration. Despite her advanced age, she can still carry a bundle of 20 deer skins upon her forehead, as is our manner, with a burden strap, 10 miles in one day, and at the end of that day she will kindle a fire and cook a good soup of corn mush and bear meat for her favorite son. Can you guess who that might be? I am her youngest. I will always protect her and all our women and children as long as I draw breath. Now, after we danced and sang at Fort Frederick, we moved out 340 strong with some Virginians and some scouts, like this young lad over here, maybe a little older, serving as scouts out ahead of the main force. We crossed the mountains to Holston and Clinch rivers. Don't know if you're familiar with those waters, but we crossed these many mountains to get to Holston and Clinch rivers. We dropped off the Stony Ridge onto Sandy Creek. Now, the first day going down Sandy Creek was difficult. There were many rains that winter. We had to cross streams 46 times on the first day, 20 times on the second day, and numerous times on other days thereafter, as the stream grew larger, wider and deeper. We came to the great cane break along Sandy Creek, and the horses fed well, but we did not stay long enough for them to satisfy their hunger on the canes that grow there. We moved out westward through a low gap, and we came to a branch of Sandy Creek. Now there on that branch, our scouts found a bear hunting camp of the enemy. The hunters we tracked have been killing bears to render fat. You see, the land along Sandy Creek, like the mountains around here, is full of bears. Indeed, there are so many bears there, people of several nations conduct our hunts there. The Delawares, Miamis, Mingos, Catawbas, we Cherokee, and even the Shawanoes. We often cross paths hunting sleeping bears in that region when we are not at war. Have any of you men ever hunted sleeping bears? You have not hunted sleeping bears. I'll be glad to share this with you. I must tell you, if you intend to spend time in this region after the war, you must learn to hunt sleeping bears. Just because you have had successful crops in the past does not mean you will always have successful crops. So upon some occasions, you may cast your seed upon the ground and great flocks of birds descend upon your fields and eat all your seeds. Or perhaps your seeds take root, as they have in the past few years, but when they get knee-high, a herd of buffaloes tramples them into dust. Then how will you feed your families in the cold winter moons? You must learn to hunt the sleeping bears so you can obtain meat and fat and marrow and the skins to make warm winter bedding. I'll be glad to share this with you later if you wish, but now I want to tell you more of the war. We found many signs of the enemies on that branch we followed to war, where we found the bear hunting camp, including many horse tracks where they had been thieving your horses from your plantations, as you well know. To this day, I have heard Virginia soldiers call that branch War Creek because of the warrior signs we found there. Now we continued on and we came to the forks of Sandy Creek. As you might imagine, below the forks, the water was very high. We, Cherokee, we built canoes out of the bark of the great elm trees that grow there. Major Lewis, well, it's only 7 days for us to get from our towns on Tennessee River to the Ohio River towns of the Shawanoe. 4 overland, 3 by canoe. Had we not had the Virginian Army, perhaps I should say, had we not had the assistance of your fine Virginian Army, we could have easily been to the Shawanoe towns in the time it took us to reach the Sandy Creek Forks. Major Lewis saw the wisdom in canoes. He put his men to work building canoes, but he built them of the dugout variety. Heavy, unwieldy in high water, all of Major Lewis's canoes capsized. Much of the remaining food and ammunition were lost. The horses still carried food, of course, those who were yet alive. Some had starved to death. The way was rough. The pack train had to climb numerous mountains, several times. In places, the water ran against the cliffs of the mountains. There was no footing along its banks. Some of the men built too many fires, too big, and ate too much food. They were starving because there was not enough. They were used to eating better. They were down to a handful of butter and flour every day for 2 weeks running. The game was scarce. Some of the men, not only did their bellies growl, but their voices grumbled as well. This led to discontent. And some of the men turned against the orders of their officers to proceed. And almost an entire company left the army altogether to go home. Finally, Major Lewis saw that the dying horses, the poor food stock, and the mutinous behavior of the men would only end in great disaster should the two armies continue our march towards the Sandy Creek Forks. So Major Lewis asked me to return with him to Virginia to discuss the war effort with the head men there. I agreed to do so. A gang of 50 warriors accompanied us. Those of us who returned with Major Lewis, we fared well. We ate the remaining horses, and we killed a number of bears along the way. But later, in Williamsburg, I heard of the men who returned against the orders of their officers. They proceeded by way of the North Fork of Sandy Creek, where they were forced to boil their rawhide tugs to make soup to stay alive. I'll pass this along, or you will pass this along. You'll be able to see, while I've been here in the Potomac Forts, talk about that campaign. And to this day, they call that fork, that North Fork of Sandy Creek, the Tug Fork, because of the ordeal that they went through. After we met with the head men, Governor Dinwiddie ordered Major Lewis to come and build a fort amongst us so that our women could be defended while we go off to war on your behalf. So he came. My gang escorted him. We stopped at Cherokee, our nation's principal town I told you of earlier, along the way. And there, our head man, our governor, Kanehati, you may know him as Old Hop. He walks with a limp. He's been lame since birth. Old Hop and our second man, the Taco Kalu, they asked me if, please, would you like to have a seat? They asked me, what did they ask me? Many things. They asked me in particular at the end of the conversation, had we been poorly treated by you Virginians, as had some of our brother warriors? But I told them we'd never been so well used in any parts as we had been in Virginia. Not only the governor and the great men made us presents, but the people in general was kind, like showed me respect, like you're showing me right now. And I spoke to a larger group. And there were so many, and the old ones couldn't hear, so I spoke with my hands, as is our manner in such instances. I remember some of what I said. I could spend my blood for my brothers, the Virginians, and I am sure if you were all as well acquainted with my brothers, you would spend your blood for them too. Thank you, brother. Then, in Tamale, my hometown, Major Lewis had to depart from us and go back to Virginia. He and John McNeil, Captain John McNeil. You may know John McNeil. Does anyone know John McNeil? Anyone know Major Lewis? They were both very brave and honorable and wise men. We became very fast friends, those two gentlemen and myself. He had to return, both of them had to return, and they left with me in Tamale, my hometown, the linguister, Mr. John Watts. Does anybody know Mr. John Watts? No? Mr. John Watts, well, first of all, does anybody know what a linguister does? Be louder. Translate. A linguister speaks more than one tongue. And so his grasp of the Cherokee tongue is tolerably good, and so he stayed with us and translated for the Englishman there, who stayed with us as well. Well, one time, I remember Mr. Watts asked my wife for some butter she had made from our milch cow. And so she didn't know why, and she didn't ask. It's not our way to pry, but she gave him the butter. He asked for food, she gave him the food. Later that night, we were invited to a celebration of the birth of your God, Christ Jesus, by reading from his sacred book. That's what they were going to do. And so we gathered together. I brought my children, for we were interested in seeing the customs of the English, and I had seen many Sunday services while we were on the Sandy Creek campaign, and since I have been here in the Potomac region. So I wanted my children to be exposed to your religion as well. And so we enjoyed coming to the gathering. And after the Englishman sang a song and read from the sacred book, then we all shared a drink of rum. And it was only slightly watered, and it was heated enough to melt the butter. So now my wife knew, and I knew what that was all about. They said it was your traditional drink to share with loved ones on Christ's Mass, hot buttered rum. So on that Christ Mass Eve, I was in a good mood. We all were in a good mood. Friendship, joy, love for one another. And I asked Mr. Watts if he would write a letter from me to Captain McNeil and Major Lewis, for I wanted them to know something. He agreed to do so. And I remember some of what I told them, the most important thing. I said to them, the great being above knows what is in my heart, and I want to share it with you now. You and I have always thought alike. My advice to you, stick to war like men, and let the children in Virginia grow up to become men before they are killed by their enemies. It was a letter of encouragement, for there were many downtrodden Virginians, like yourselves, beaten from your plantations. 250 plantations in that part of Virginia burnt to the ground. And so, after penning that letter, the linguister, Mr. Watts, he came and spent the rest of the evening with us at my home. Indeed, he spent the rest of the time there amongst us. Brothers and sisters, I recruited heavily that winter on your behalf. This was the past winter. And now here we are. Hundreds of Cherokee have come here to help you. Wahatchie was here earlier. I have come to replace him. My gang is stationed at Pearsall's Fort even now. I was asked by your officers to come here and speak to you and encourage you. Do not abandon your plantations. We have ranging companies. Your men are going with my men. They are learning to fight the French in the Indian manner, as the French have already learned. Your young officers, the ones who are fit and can keep up, they are going with us and learning to fight in a manner that will soon completely rid the region to Fort Duquesne of the enemy. Brothers and sisters, do not let the king down. Stay here. Grow your crops. Harvest your crops. Do not let the enemy defeat you here as well as on the battlefield. If the great being above favors me, I intend to visit King George and tell him what an honor it has been to serve him in this war and the last. I want to thank him for the kindness that he has shown to us over the years. Without the trade that he encourages between us, red people, and you white and brown people, we would be a poor people indeed. Perhaps so would you. The king will be glad to hear me testify to the brightness of the ancient covenant chain that links us two peoples together. Soon the war will be over, and we will stand at the door of the great council house wherein we will make new treaties to benefit both our peoples. Now, if there is anything that you would ask of me to help you understand your Cherokee brethren and sisters more, or to perhaps help you understand those who have plantations further west, the condition of those plantations. I am very familiar with the region between here and the Ohio River. It has sustained my people for countless generations. Any question at all, in order to be orderly, please raise your hand in the English manner and I will call upon you. Yes, sir.
Where is your hometown in English word?
Well, most Englishmen I have talked to know where the Tennessee River is. Is that familiar to you, the Tennessee River? My hometown is Tomotley. It is on the Tennessee River, near the forks with the Hiawassee River and near the forks of the Holston. I'm not sure if that helps you understand. We have traders who are very familiar with the country there, but most Virginians I have found in this region are not familiar with that country. But I hope the Tennessee River helps you get some understanding. Are there other questions? For a while, I must join my men at Pearsall's.
What's the average size of your war party?
My war gang is 18 strong right at the moment. Somewhere between 20-25 is the best for most situations. Now, you must understand, brother, that sometimes whole armies move north. Indeed, we had an army of 130 on the Sandy Creek campaign, and I came with others. There were 80 in one large party. That was not a war gang. That was several war gangs. But there were 80 in one party, plus my war gang, which would have made 98. And there have been 120 were here. When Wahatchie was here, by the time he left, there were 120 here. So now we're up around 250, I believe, 250 of the Army. But the war gangs are typically around 20, 25. Sometimes smaller, depending on the situation required. Yes?
All carrying long rifles?
Not all with long rifles, although we were very well equipped on the Sandy Creek campaign. Every one of my men had an arm. Now, they were not all long arms. Some had been shortened and more like the naval guns. Much lighter, not as accurate, but they're muskets. They're not nearly as accurate as the rifles, as you know. And some few rifles are amongst us today, not many. But not every one of my men is armed with a long arm or a rifled gun. Some of them have bows and arrows, and some have spears.
What do you eat on the trail?
Brother, I want to say one more thing about that. If you have any influence with the commissary, if I do need 3 more guns. We'll take whatever you can get us.
What's your ball and powder?
We always need ball and powder, as you might suppose. Anytime we engage the French, we typically have run out of powder and ball. Brother, what did you want to ask?
What do you usually eat on the warpath?
Oh, well, we eat very little when we are in the enemy's country, but we do occasionally find something to eat. Let me tell you a story to give you some idea. Earlier this year, the Swallow, a great man amongst us, led his war gang, and with him were a couple of Virginia soldiers, young officers. And they went far to Fort Duquesne, and they took captive a Frenchman. I don't know if you know him, Marie-Francois Picotet Sur de Balestre, the commandant of Fort Biamis. But what I want to tell you, related to your question, even though they captured him, and he's an important man, and he's not going to be turned over to you, by the way, don't even try. He's going to stay with us. We did not eat him. The old people tell me that that was once our custom, but we don't do that anymore. But Balestre is safe amongst us. Don't worry about him. We will not scalp him, nor will we eat him, nor will we torture him. He's too important. We'll get something out of the French on your behalf for him, though. But since he was killed, a couple of the other French officers who were captured, or French soldiers who were captured, one of them was put to death because Swallow was killed. He was a great man. And then they had to move fast. 115 miles they traveled back across the Allegheny Mountain to the Cumberland Fort. And on the way, because they were in such a rush, they had nothing but the onions to eat along the way. The onions that come up after the snows melt. The fat, the broad-leaved onions. I'm not sure what you call them around here. Ramps. Ramps. That's what they're called around here. That's all we had, they had to eat. That gang, that's all they had to eat. Onions along the way. That is often the case. We travel 30, 40, 50 miles a day on foot. We don't often have time, and we will not, in enemy territory, we will not fire our guns. Some of our men go out with bow and arrow and try to get food for us. There have been times we had nothing to eat but the little turtle, the little land tortoise, to share amongst 20 men. Not much. That happens. I assure you, though, when we capture the Christians, the French officers and their soldiers, we treat them as well as we treat our own men. If all we have is a box turtle, they get some of it. They get whatever we have. Our prisoners are always treated well. We have a warrior woman with us. Not in my gang, but at the larger army camp. And she assures that we treat our prisoners well. Are there other questions? Did I answer your questions, brother? Are there other questions? Have you been stationed here long?
A year.
A year? It's a long time to be away from home. Or is your family nearby?
South Branch.
South Branch. And you are here on this side of the mountain? You're stationed in this region. Going from fort to fort with the ranging company?
Yes.
Perhaps you and I can serve together. I can show you some tricks of the trade that you don't know. Other questions? Oh, please, folks. I'm only here for a short time.
Did you say the name of your tribe again?
Cherokee. Yeah, the Cherokee. Cherokee. I forgot about the difference in dialect.
One of your
Do you
relatives.
still scalp?
Oh, yes. Every time someone is killed, that is proof that we have defeated the enemy.
You save the scalps? What-
Oh, yes. We take them home. You come over to my camp later and I'll give you a thorough explanation. I'm serious. I'm telling you the truth. Yes, brother.
Do you still use blowguns?
The boys use blowguns around the fields, but we don't. The Catawbas still use blowguns in war. We Chalagi, basically our boys use the blowguns when they're protecting the fields from the small animals. But the Catawbas still use blowguns. And they are very good at it. They are great poisoners, you know. They use poisons in their darts. I can tell you about that at the war camp as well. How about I break character now? I'm Doug Wood again. You all have any questions about the research or anything else? And I can still talk about the Cherokee involvement in the war if you wish, but just want to do the normal protocol for the Humanities Council, which is to break character and answer questions as Doug Wood, if you have any. Oh, come on.
What spurred your interest to start researching and learning and being involved in this?
Well, early influence was my grandmother on my father's side, who was familiar with the Cherokee ancestry, and you know, she always called me her little Indian boy or her little Cherokee boy, and it's far removed. My relationship is far removed, but it came down through the generations, and my grandmother was very proud of it. So she made my sister and I aware of it every chance. So that was in there already when I grew up and went through college and got work. And then I got involved in a trail building project to honor Mary Draper Ingalls. She was a frontier woman in the southern part of Virginia who was captured in the French and Indian War, taken about 500 miles away, made her escape with another woman, an old German woman, made it back. So she had traveled about 1,000 miles, you know, to and from. And on the way back, she had no assistance from anyone except the old German woman. Somehow they made it back. It's a fascinating story, and there are lots of captivity stories, and I have been talking to people here over and over again who are descended from these captives who returned. It's amazing how the influence of that period trickles down today, and people still know those stories. So anyway, in her honor, we were building a trail along her route of travel, and we decided to put together a dramatic presentation to try to help people understand what we were doing. So we wanted to tell Mary's story, and of course you got to have somebody to play the Virginians, you got to have somebody to play the Cherokees, and somebody to play the Shawnees, and so on and so forth. So I volunteered to play a Delaware, who were at war against the Virginians. So that got me started into reenacting. And of course, when you start into this hobby, you meet people, don't you, Dave? You meet people, and they've done research, and they fill your head with other ideas, and you begin to realize, wow, such a rich historic period, and people are still connected to it today. People are tracing their ancestry back to that time. So my wife and I got bitten by the bug, and we started doing more and more reenacting. And of course, when you do research, add the research to your reenacting, you begin to realize there's great potential for interpreting this history in a living history manner. Because the first time I saw a living history presentation, I mean, it really hit me. I felt like this person was from the period. So we decided that, well, she didn't so much want to get into the first person characterization, but I wanted to get into first person characterization after that. And so that's how it happened, basically, in a nutshell. Any other questions?
What does the feather say? Other than
Well, let me ask this woman here. Am I handsome? That's all it is. This is a way to look good. Now, the southern Indians pierced their noses. We don't have a lot of evidence except for Pontiac supposedly had a pierced nose. Big enough piercing to put something large through. We don't really know how big the southeastern Indians had, but we know they wore silver that they got in trade with the Europeans, like most of the eastern woodland Indians did. But the Carolina parakeet is an extinct animal. The feathers were traded from the southern Indians to the northern Indians because the northern Indians didn't have them. So I wear this feather so somebody like you will ask the question, and then I can tell you about the change in landscape and animal populations from the French and Indian War till now, and the Indian trade too. I actually have two quotes from one from an Englishman, one from a Frenchman, regarding the trade in these feathers between the southern Indians and the northern Indians. And sometimes I tease my biology friends, I'm a biologist, and sometimes I tease them and say, maybe in the 18th century, the American Indian trade in parakeet feathers started the decline of the Carolina parakeet. Of course, it probably didn't. But.
So Doug, if I was close enough to see and hear you, what would tell me you were a Cherokee?
If I was speaking Cherokee, you mean? Or
if I saw you, either way.
Well, let me give you the clue about language first of all. The Cherokee have only one labial sound. Anybody know what a labial sound is? Anybody here a linguist? My niece is a linguist, or what do you call it? Speech pathologist. So she and I talk about language a lot. A labial is when you put your lips together when you're making a sound, like buh, puh, that's a fricative, but it's close to a labial. Cherokees only have one labial sound. It's an M sound. They don't have a P, they don't have a B. If you've ever watched an old Western and you've seen an old Indian man in an old Western speaking, and it looks like he's not moving his lips. That's a Cherokee guy they hired. I can't remember his name. He was old back when the spaghetti westerns were real popular, and they used him a lot. And he was, even though he's supposed to be a Comanche or a Sioux or a Blackfoot, he's speaking Cherokee, and he hardly moves his lips because they don't have the labial in their language. They don't have but one labial. So if you were to watch a Delaware or a Shawnee or an Iroquois person speak, you would see them touch their lips more frequently. Cherokee rarely would be touching his lips. I'll do what I said earlier with an emphasis on trying to do it the way a Cherokee would do it. You didn't hardly see my lips move. And they talk mostly with the tip of their tongue anchored to the back of their lower incisors. It hardly moves. The tongue hardly moves in their mouth. A native speaker. So that's one clue. Now, how would you tell by just looking at me? It would be hard. The American Indians could do it, and the Scouts could do it once they learned the tricks. Do we know for sure today what they were? No. There's one I'm pretty sure would have told you, and that is the length of my scalp lock. The Cherokees tended to have a long scalp lock. Most of the Northern Indians tended to have a short scalp lock. That's not 100%. So you would have to take several clues to try to determine what nation does this person belong to. But the long scalp lock was one that was pretty common amongst the Cherokee and not common amongst the Northern Indians. A little bit about my appearance. I'm not quite like Ostenaco. I'm close. As I said, we don't know if he wore a feather through his nose. I wear it to give me an opportunity to talk to you specifically about some things. We do know he wore silver through his nose because he was described by a man in England named Joshua Reynolds who painted a portrait of him and drew some sketches of him. That portrait exists today. It was in Oklahoma in a museum there. I think it has moved, but I'm not real sure. And interesting, Joshua Reynolds described him as having tattoos all over, or pinctures he called them, I think. But when he painted him, he didn't show one tattoo on him. So, artists take license, and I warn anybody who's doing 18th century research, do not presume that the image you see is exact. So, but his sketches, we think, were used to make some woodcuts that were used to print some pamphlets in 1762 when Ostenaco and two other Cherokees visited the king. And those pamphlets exist today. I've got some with me. I'll need to dig them out of the car. I've got an image that was used on a pamphlet. I'll dig it out of the car and you can come by later and look at it after I get something to eat. But it shows him in the middle of these other two Cherokees, and it shows a crisscross pattern on his head. Not the thick black marks you see, but before I put my paint on, I took a Sharpie and did a crisscross pattern on my head, two river-like symbols coming out of his mouth, and a Maltese cross on his throat, a symbol of Masonic order. All three Cherokees were depicted with the Maltese cross. We don't know for sure, but I suspect they got tattoos of the Maltese cross when they joined the Masonic, if they joined the Masonic order. I think that's why they were shown with the Maltese cross on their throats. I think. Joseph Brant was a Mohawk who started the first American Indian Masonic Lodge in North America, and Joseph Brant's grandfather fought in the French and Indian War on the side of the British. So I know I went out of field there. But
One more question. Was the sign language universal enough that you could converse or have a
Maine to Florida, you could converse with American Indians with sign language. That's testified to by a number of authors from the 1700s. That the Indians were gesticulating and they could all understand one another. Do we know exactly what those signs were? No. I use the sign language as written down by a fellow who was associated with Blackfeet and Sioux. I can't remember his name right off the top of my head. But anyway, he put together a book, and the Boy Scouts began using that book and put the signs in the Boy Scout handbook. For years, the Boy Scout handbook had a section on Indian Sign Language. It doesn't anymore.